partial government shutdown ended Tuesday after the U.S. House approved a more than $1 trillion spending package. 21 Democrats joined Republicans to support the bill, which President Trump then signed. It funds several large departments through September, but only funds the Department of Homeland Security through February 13th. The plan is for lawmakers to use the next week and a half to negotiate changes to federal immigration enforcement in the wake of the deaths of U.S. citizens Renee Good and Alex Pretti in Minneapolis. To discuss that and other developments in politics in our regular Wednesday political roundup, we are joined today by the hosts of Houston Public Media's Party Politics program, Brandon Rottinghaus and Jeronimo Cortina. Good morning to you both.
Good morning, Craig.
Good morning.
What specifically are lawmakers negotiating?
Well, so as you said, they basically kind of cleared the decks and everything got funded with the exception of DHS. DHS doesn't just include ICE, by the way. It includes things like the kind of budgets in terms of Border Patrol, TSA, Coast Guards, a lot of things that are on the table here. And it's really the ICE that's the issue. So you've got kind of competing explanations for kind of what both sides would like. Democrats would basically like to see a lot more kind of regulation in terms of what it is that ICE agents can do. They want to have warrants required. They want to have masks required. They want to have IDs and body cameras all put together. Some of these things are in the works already. It's possible the president will issue an executive order to put some of these things into place, which is a pretty common technique for president and Congress to negotiate. But basically, Democrats want to have some kind of regulatory issues. The Republicans, on the other hand, want to do some crackdowns on sanctuary cities who are not complying with what the federal government's asking for. So there will be some, negotiations, some give and take here. But I think for sure the White House wants to put this in place. They'd like to get this done and soon.
What of the things that Democrats are calling for here, Jeronimo, are Republicans already willing to do?
It depends on the day that you ask a Republican or a Democrat. Because Democrats have been saying we need to abolish ICE, which obviously is a non-starter for Republicans. And then on the other hand, you have to see what are the characteristics of the asks, right? And what are the characteristics in terms of giving transparency, of basically following the law, applying immigration law, and then other issues regarding, for example, issues that may be very simple in terms of you have to not wear a mask, you have to identify, you have to use body cams, so on and so forth, like any other law agency here.
Yeah, I want to get to that point in a moment, like any other agency, because that is one of the key arguments that Democrats are making. But first, let's get down to the nitty-gritty of it, Brandon. So far, as I understand it, and as NPR has been reporting this morning, it's just the body cameras that there seems to be any sort of agreement on. Again, negotiation to come. The Department of Homeland Security already says they're deploying body cams in Minneapolis, but that deployment could take many months. So as you were pointing out, the key here is Democrats want it in writing. They want it in legislation.
Exactly. And I think they're right to do so. They've been reluctant to trust the administration on these issues. This is in the context, too, of essentially the federal courts really claiming that ICE is not following the law on these things and DHS is not pursuing some of these things in a legal way. So there definitely are a lot of mistrust and bad blood happening. So Democrats would very much like to see this in writing. One way, as I said, they can do that is that you have the president sort of jumpstart things by issuing an executive order requiring these things. That does allow for some of the negotiations to be able to smooth.
But any executive order can always be rescinded. And I think that, again, you get into that point of trust. I think Democrats know they want Congress to act on it.
I think that's right. And, Congress has been sort of unable to operate effectively except on these kind of emergency situations. This is different because I think everybody wants to move forward on this, but it is going to require pretty tense negotiations. Republicans in Congress don't have much say here, really. This is between the Democrats, especially in the Senate, and the White House.
As you alluded to, Jeronimo, House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries was on PBS NewsHour the other night, and here's how he put it. He said, quote, "Fundamentally, we believe that ICE should conduct itself like every other law enforcement agency in the country." So I guess my question is, since there seems to be some measure of agreement on body cams, maybe not necessarily in how they're rolled out, but the idea that that ICE agents, CBP as well, should all have body cams, the part where Republicans seem to be balking so far is the idea of federal officers not wearing masks. and also seeking warrants from a judge instead of from their own department. Why are Republicans balking at those two elements?
Well, the argument that they're making is that they're impeding federal investigations and they're impeding ICE's and Border Patrol and basically Homeland Security to implement the executive order of the president, which means you have to deport, as it was written, undocumented migrants that have a record. But what we have seen is not exactly that, right? What we have seen is using a sledgehammer rather than applying in a very surgical manner the implementation of the executive order. So the big question here is why not? If a federal officer comes to your house and it has an administrative order to enter your house, well, what's that? What does that mean?
They're giving themselves permission
exactly
to circumvent the Fourth
Right.
Amendment is how Democrats are characterizing
Right. And
it.
the
certainly.
argument that Congress is making, especially Speaker Johnson, is that requiring a judge is something that cannot be implemented, right? But then the big question is, well, yes, but that's the rule of law. That's how we do things here. So what would happen if we have a different administration from a different president, different political party, and does the exact same thing? No, we have rules. So regardless of political affiliation, your rights as a citizen, right, are going to be protected under the law, regardless of political polarization, regardless of anything that could happen in the context.
I imagine the argument in response is, well, that applies to U.S. citizens. It doesn't apply to non-citizens.
Well, I mean, certainly, but still, if you're going to be deported, you have due process, right? And the issue here is not if a person has due process or not has due process. I believe that person has due process because that is on the books. That is the law of the land. So the problem is not only, in this case, how we move from border to interior enforcement, but I think that one of the issues that we have not been talking about is how the immigration court system is 1,000 billion% overwhelmed, right? Understaffed, underfunded. So if you want to fix that, you have to start that. And obviously the big absent player here is Congress.
And that's also not something they're going to accomplish in the next 9 days, if we're,
Or
if we're
20
being
days.
honest. Right. But in the next 9 days, again, one of the points of contention is masks, and that's a whole separate issue. The argument that Republicans seem to be making is they're concerned that these federal officers will be doxxed, that basically that there are too many people out there that are looking to actively identify, individually identify them, whether they've done anything or not to justify it.
Yeah, I think that's fair and certainly something that you're going to see in terms of backlash when this is all said and done. And obviously the kind of politics of this have gotten to the point where there's just no trust. And so I feel like that's a point that they have to kind of resolve. They haven't done this from the start, which they should have done. The policies got too aggressive and the Trump administration knows it. That's why they're negotiating. That's why they're downshifting on this.
What happens if they don't come to a resolution in 9 days?
If they don't, then essentially DHS won't have an operating budget, which means they can't do the kinds of operations that they've been doing. It'll have to close down individual kind of elements that are not essential parts of government.
They do have $75 billion, though, to spend over the next 4 years in a bill that was passed last year. Can they just use that money as a stopgap?
They can use some of it, depending on exactly what the specific intention is. The laws are a little bit ambiguous in terms of exactly how these operate, but there are some things they can do and some things that they can't do.
What are some things that they cannot do that might be tangible and obvious for the rest of us?
Yeah, I think some of the specific things include like having the operations that they've been conducting, some of these raids, travel to these various cities. They've got plans to have other cities in like under this sort of operation.
How about TSA agents in airports?
That's a great question. Those are essential workers, so they're going to still be working, but it'll be in a much more reduced fashion than it has been in the past.
Geronimo, who's hurt or helped politically if there's no deal reached?
I think that this is, as usual, immigration is a issue, and in this particular case, an issue that helps both Republicans and Democrats, because Republicans are saying we are doing what we're supposed to be doing. We're fixing what the Biden administration created, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We're putting the worst of the worst, so on and so forth. So it bounces and it tracks very well with their constituents. Then, on the other hand, for Democrats, it's the complete opposite. Human rights are not being respected, this and that, et cetera, so it also works very well. So this means that this is another big and huge example of political polarization and how it creates this chamber. The big problem here is that the policy, the right policy, what we have in the books, right, the responsibility of agencies of complying with the law has not been discussed, and everything is 1,000% politicized.
Gents, on Saturday, there were two special elections in Texas of some real significance. We'll get to the Houston area one in just a second. But first, a Texas State Senate district, the 9th in Fort Worth, flipped from Republican to Democrat. Why is that significant?
I think it's a significant change, and obviously this has gotten national attention because anything that, kind of moves in a Democratic direction in Texas is national news. But I would characterize it more as a tremor than an earthquake. The fact that it's a runoff to an off-cycle election to have a temporary replacement for a senator is, I think, in a lot of people's minds, sort of a bit of a caveat to it. But that said, Democrats did perform well. Republicans didn't show up. People are sounding the alarm that this is going to be the way things go in the midterms if they don't make those changes. I think you also have to see this as a rebuke to Dan Patrick. He handpicked the Republican candidate, and she did not do well. Partly it's because they didn't run a great campaign. The fact that there was this sort of civil war in the Republican Party, and there was a real divide between one of the other Republicans who ran and the general and her, means that you just are going to, I think, find them in some disarray. So again, I don't think it's the kind of earth-shattering news that would be like if a Democrat won a U.S. Senate seat in Texas. But certainly it means that there are some bright spots for Democrats moving forward.
But probably more of a one-off than a sign of dramatic things to come.
Probably so. There are a couple of things that are useful. I mean, you certainly saw people who were moderates shift towards the Democrats. That's something Democrats have been trying to do. Taylor Remmett who's a Democrat who won as a union leader, and that's something that hasn't happened ever in the Texas Senate in terms of someone getting elected. So the secret sauce of finding the right kind of candidate does matter. Also, you saw a huge swing among Latinos. That's something that is a swing vote in Texas and beyond, and something the Democrats are hoping to recreate.
Geronimo, back here in Houston, 18th District Congressman Christian Menefee was sworn in Monday night. Are you surprised that happened as quickly as it did? And let me set the context here. It's been 11 months since the 18th District was represented. There were some not so subtle delays in when elections took place just to get to this point, all because of this really tight majority that the GOP holds in the U.S. House.
Yeah, it was extremely surprising to see that. We have other examples. Adelita Grijalva was sworn in like months after winning that special election. So it was surprising, and it is surprising given that now even Republicans have a very, very, very slim majority in the House. But again, I'm happy that now people in the I guess, congressional 18th district or 9th district or any combination of both have now representation and just getting ready to vote for the new primary election.
Yeah, Brandon, as we discussed on Monday's show, Menefee has just a month to serve before the next month's primary election, which will pit him in the newly drawn 18th district with longtime Congressman Al Green, among others. This is because Green, through redistricting, has been shifted to that newly drawn district. What do you see as the key to victory for either of them or anybody else on the ballot?
Yeah, it's a Lee Corso not so fast moment. You get to be in Congress for a couple of months, and you can do a lot of things in a couple of months in Congress for sure. And certainly, like Geronimo said, this changes the balance of power just enough that there's going to be some alters to the negotiations. But I think that this is an important matchup for the 18th because it does I think, reflect this generational change we're seeing all over the Democratic Party, but especially here in Houston. Christian Menefee is going to implicitly make the case that he's a better choice. He's younger. He's got kind of the more progressive mindset. And Al Green, of course, has been very well known in this district with the efforts to have longitudinal sort of representation in that district. So we will see, I think, a pretty pitched battle here. I don't know if it'll get ugly or not, but it definitely will be a typification of the kind of generational change that we've seen happening all over the country.
Let me ask the two of you to throw your headphones on because we have a call on the line. David is in the Heights, and he wanted to talk about the 18th District. David, what's your question or comment?
Yes, I'm happy to see we're getting a new Congress. We have a new congressman finally, and I'm very sorry that he has to run against an incumbent. I don't know if did Al Green move to the district, or did we grab his part of his district?
I think he lives in the district, and I think given the new changes, it just basically kind of reoriented the geographic space around him. So that was my understanding.
Yeah, thanks very
much. I'll be happy to see Menefee win that primary. I think he's got a lot of enthusiasm, and it's kind of sad not having a congressman all that time. I think the government ought to send me a few shares of Intel or something.
All right. Thanks for the call. We appreciate it. I mean, this also is, let's face it, a very intriguing race, not only because it's, Jeronimo, just a month away, but because of what Brandon pointed out, the generational changes, the political shifts. It'll be interesting to see how it plays out. I'm not sure we really know.
Well, yeah, and we have seen it not only here in Houston. We saw it with former Mayor Sylvester Turner when he was elected to Congress. There was also a primary election, and one of the promises that he made was, I'm going to retire in the next couple of years just to pass the baton. And we have seen that also in other parts in the RGB region. And I think it's extremely important because the base of the Democratic Party is a base that needs to be excited. And I agree, Representative Green has been excellent in terms of representing his constituents, but those constituents and the overall base of the Democratic Party has changed. And perhaps now Congressman Menefee can represent that in a different way that others can't.
And you've got a new wrinkle, too, because Lena Hidalgo, the outgoing county judge, has endorsed Al Green in that race. So that'll definitely kind of develop additional kinds of battle lines. So it's not as neat as a kind of generational change that we've talked about. There are a lot of other factors involved, some of it personal, some of it political, but it will be one of the, I think, marquee races in the country.
Let's move on to some national news. President Trump has been saying in recent days he wants to nationalize elections. What does he mean?
I don't know. Well, we don't know because it's illegal. We don't know because elections are designed by constitutional design to be run by the states. It's very clear in Article 1, Section 4, that elections are run by the states. Of course, Congress can make some changes. Congress can enact legislation to fix this and that, etc., but it's very unconstitutional to say we're going to be running elections. Now, that is a very particular thing or aspect of American democracy. In other places, in other advanced democracies, the federal government or a national institution, that it is not the federal government, it's an independent agency, independent body that is elected independently, runs elections, right? So when we're thinking about electoral systems, the U.S. case is completely 100% different from that of other Western democracies, but obviously has a logic based in the Constitution and based in our founding fathers.
Simply put, states run elections, but there have been caveats to this, but we have to go way back to make that case. And that's basically back to Reconstruction, where the federal government basically took control of all of the federal functions. There are clauses, and the courts have suggested that it's possible that the states give up some of those responsibilities during some elections where you have both state and federal elections. So there are potential opportunities here, but it is just a messy scenario. To do it for political reasons is even worse. So We don't know what the president's saying. He says there need to be 15 states under this. He didn't specify which states they were. So there's still a lot of ambiguity about how this would actually function. And because the federal government runs things so well, I think there's just a lot of concern that this could just get messy very fast.
What's on party politics this week?
We're going to talk a lot about some of these issues, but we're also going to dig into the issues involving Ted Cruz's funding operation that's been eyebrow raising, including from people like John Cornyn. We'll talk about some of the controversies happening in the Texas Senate race on the Democratic side. There have been rumors that James Tallarico has said some negative things about James Allred, and that means that there's going to be controversy.
Colin
Allred, sorry, yes. Relative of James Allred. Colin Allred. That basically created some clapback from Allred that has put a wrinkle into Tallarico's hopes to win that nomination.
Brandon Rottinghaus and Jeronimo Cortina host Houston Public Media's Party Politics program. You can hear it Friday nights at 7:30 on News 88.7. See it Friday night at 8 on Houston Public Media TV 8, or check it out at your leisure on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. They are also professors of political science at the University of Houston. Gentlemen, thank you very much.
Thanks, Greg.
Thank you.